Well, good evening and welcome to our final webinar for this Growing Young cohort. Really pleased that Matthew is here with us this evening from the States, and Matthew's going to share with us just some thoughts about the continuing journey that we're on kind of through Growing Young. I'm looking forward to that. So I hope you've been encouraged over the last wee while. I've certainly been encouraged as I've got news back from different folk about things that are going on. I just want to start this evening by reading just a couple of verses from Matthew's Gospel and the parable of the mustard seed. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like this. A man takes a mustard seed and sows it in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it grows up, it is the biggest of all plants. It becomes a tree, so that birds come and make their nests in the branches. A man takes a mustard seed and sows it in his field. Jesus is deliberately saying to his disciples from very early on that even though they look around them and don't see very much at the moment, the movement that he is drawing them into is a movement that will grow beyond their recognition. The mustard seed wasn't the smallest of seeds, but it often was used as an illustration of the smallest seed. You recognize that when Jesus talks about having faith as small as a mustard seed. It's small, and yet from those small beginnings, something grows and develops. And the stories that I've heard coming back from your congregations have been about things that are starting off, things that are small, things that are growing. And it seemed appropriate, therefore, to talk about a mustard seed. And for those of you who are visual kind of learners, then there it is. It's starting small. And yet what Jesus talks about is the birds coming from different directions and sharing together and building their nests. It was a sign of folk from different nations actually finding their place and their home in the kingdom. The kingdom was going to expand and grow, and those from different places were going to find their place. And Growing Young has been focused on that. Not so much of folk from different nations, but people of different generations finding their place within the movement that Jesus started, finding their place within the church. Folk of different generations who sometimes have felt excluded or felt that it's not for them or it doesn't suit them, finding that there's a part and a place for them. And it's not just been about young folk, it's actually about every generation being involved. I was listening to a recording we made of a conversation with folk from Portobello, and they were talking about not always using the term growing young because it put some folk off. And they talked about everyone sharing together across the generations. I looked at Willie Barclay's commentary about this afternoon. He said, it's the fact of history that the greatest things must always begin with the smallest beginnings. And much of what we've been about in all of this has been about small beginnings and believing that God honours us as we take those steps. Small beginnings that are important. And so as we come and share tonight, actually there is something, I believe, about recognising what God is doing among us and praying that those small beginnings will be something that will bear fruit and bear fruit for the kingdom. The other thing in all of this for me would also be about what we were focused on last time we were together, which is about trusting in God through and in all of this, recognising that God is with us in this. You catch that at the end of Matthew's Gospel when Jesus talks about being there. I'll be with you to the end of the age. You catch it in Jesus' words at the Ascension. Don't leave here until the Holy Spirit comes. And you catch it in Paul's words about growth. I planted, Apollos waters, God brings the growth. And so something important in all of this is we trust in God and as we look to him. So as we start this evening together, let's just pray. Lord, we thank you for those words of Jesus, for the encouragement that we receive, for the way that we see that things started small, that this movement, the church of which we are a part, was small in number. And yet you were about something in them and amongst them, and we believe that you are at work in and amongst us. Lord, thank you. We honour you, for you are a faithful God. And as we come this evening, help us to celebrate what we see you doing among us, and help us to give ourselves to what you have ahead, that we may trust you in this, and that we may know you in this. So Lord, bless this time, and bless each of us and our congregations as we share together. Bless Matthew as he comes and speaks to us just now. For we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I wonder whether, Neil, could you put Matthew on the spotlight rather than me? Trying to find him somewhere.
Maybe if I chatted, do I pop up if I'm speaking?
Oh, that's Keith, Matt. You've got the wrong one. Hi, Keith. How you doing? Right. Oh, and now I've got Ian. Welcome to you as well. I'm going to take you off the spotlight. I'm going to take Keith off the spotlight. And there's Matthew. Welcome, Matthew. We're glad you're with us this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me, Graham?
Yes, we can.
This is great.
Neil and I went out to Fuller, it must be 5 years ago now, something like that, just at the point that Matthew was leaving Fuller, but had been heading up the work with churches going through these cohorts. So you've got bags more experience than we've got in this, Matthew. But you're also now in a local church setting, and I know that for you that's kind of highlighted the importance of the whole growing young thing. And we're glad you're with us this evening, and I'm just going to hand over to you.
Yeah, great. Hello, everyone. Graham, it's really cool to see you again and to see Neil again. And it's really special. It's cool. It's a cool full circle moment to get to do this. What time is it there right now for you guys?
So we're 7 o'clock in the evening.
7 o'clock in the evening. Okay, it's 2 o'clock here in America, and so this is great. Well, I'm gonna fly through some information, and then for those of you who are watching, I'm gonna fly through some information, and then there will be time for Q&A. Would love to answer questions that you have, but mostly just kind of would love to have a good discussion. And so, can I just jump right in, Graham? Is that okay?
Surely, yeah, go for it.
All right. So let me give some real helpful context to where I'm at. And then I'm going to share some thoughts about change at the church that I lead, and we'll kind of take it from there. I've been a pastor for about 20, or been in full-time ministry for about 20 years, and I was a pastor for a really long time, and was connected with the Fuller Youth Institute. Some of my closest friends were there, and then I had an opportunity to come on staff full-time at the Fuller Youth Institute, and I jumped at it. I have a knack, for research. I'm passionate about research. I've published a bunch of research myself. So I jumped in. I did Fuller. I oversaw these cohorts all over the world, and it was amazing. But my heart was in pastoral ministry, and I just couldn't deny it. And so I thought that going to Fuller would be my dream job. And ironically, what I actually found was that all it does is just help inform me to do my dream job, which is in the local church. And so I jumped back in the local church, and now I'm actually in my first lead pastor role after almost 20 years of full-time ministry. I joke that I am learning and failing at an incredible rate. Uh, it's a lot of experiments and a lot of failures and a lot of real cool wins. But I moved to a small little town, a tiny little rural community. And when I say tiny, I've only ever lived in urban metropolises, in cities. And so our town has about 4,500 people. There's no major colleges or universities around us. And so when we talk about young adults, we're in a community where young people actually leave our community to head to a half hour away or an hour away to go to the local universities where there are cities. And so we've kind of had to be creative about how we reach young people and how we think about young people. One of the biggest things that we did, though, is that in the last 2 years since I've been at the church that I'm at, it's called Inspire Church, we have been unashamedly vocal about one thing, and that is that we are going to aim toward reaching families. And by reaching families is actually our window into getting to young people. And it opens by talking about the family unit. And that's what my master's degree is in. My master's is in family ministry with a concentration on how grandparents shape faith formation in grandchildren and whether or not geographic proximity matters, that kind of thing. By looking at the familial unit, it actually opens up the door to look at families from all different sorts of different perspectives. And it's allowed us to start reaching a lot of young people. And so what I decided to do early on at the church that I'm at was to start by asking two different groups of people questions. To young people, I started asking the question, what is something that you would like to see more of at our church? What do you want to hear more about? What is something that you wish we would stop doing? What seems to you as a young person like a waste of time that may have been really important to a lot of people, but it just seems like a waste of time? Those were some of the questions that I started asking young people. Mostly, what would you like to see more of at the church? To older people and to people I call Inspire Church lifers, people who have been a part of our church for a long time. Our church is 73 years old. But has had a big turnaround in the last few years. To those older people who have been at our church, I asked them this question: what are the things in our DNA as a church that can never change? Where if we stopped doing those things, we would lose our core identity as a church. And what's fascinating is this: all of the things they're saying are things about growing young. I'm not using the words growing young, but they are saying intuitively things that are growing young related. And so I have leaned in to what they are saying. I'm letting them feel like they're the ones who are making the movement and the change happen as we continue to grow. So since then, before I get into some thoughts about change, since then, here's what's happened with us really focusing on families and reaching into young people. We have had in the last 2 years 120 baptisms. A majority of those baptisms are people under 30 years old. We have grown as a church by hundreds of people, hundreds on a weekend. I all praise to God. I can't explain it. It's one of those things where I think just the growing young principles work. It's as simple as that. And we've grown by hundreds of people, and people are passionate about the mission and vision to reach the younger generation. Our budget has increased by 17%, which means that people are giving to this. People want to give to vision. They don't want to give out of desperation. And sometimes we cast vision and ask people to give out of desperation, but they actually will give to vision and not our desperate attempts to get money or whatever. If we're low on money, they'll give to that vision. So our budget has increased significantly, and we have pumped all of that extra money and those increases to families and young people. Our children's ministry has grown from 40-ish birth through fifth graders on a Sunday to 130 birth through fifth graders on a peak at its like on a Sunday at its peak. And then we launched something called the Our Turn Initiative, which is a $1.5 million goal, all aimed at reaching young people and families. And it's a 3-year kind of vision campaign. It's kind of, hey, let's get $1.5 million over the course of 3 years. And in the first 4 months, we have right now $433,000 that's been given in cash already. And so we're fully committed to this campaign, all towards family, all towards creating a place where families and young people want to be, where we're equipping parents and we're equipping grandparents. And then lastly, or a part of that is that we heard that young people said, if we're going to raise $1.5 million, we feel like we need to give away some of it. And so I got really challenged by what young people wanted to do. And what we decided to do was to take 10% of what we're raising, so $150,000, and we're giving it towards global missions in Nepal, in the country of Nepal. So I was in Nepal in August for 11 days. And the reason why we did this was because young people said, we want to give money away. And for me, I was like, $1.5 million is a lot of money. And I'm young and I don't know what I'm doing. We need all the money we can get. But I was challenged because young people were saying, we can't just always take this for ourselves. And so we decided to give that away. So we're at that point now. And our youth ministry is growing like crazy. We're heavily involved in schools, and we've got significant growth in our weekly programs. All this to say, here are some things that we're viewing with change these days at Inspire. And to like that, hopefully that's helpful context. The words, and Graham, you mentioned this, and it's so important, but the words growing young almost never get mentioned at Inspire. But the principles of growing young are the driving force of almost everything we do. In fact, we're a board-led model. I don't know exactly what it's like with the Church of Scotland, but we have a board of elders, essentially, and we have there's 8 people on our board. The board had never heard the words growing young until 3 weeks ago when I led a retreat and actually went through all of the growing young content 3 weeks ago at a retreat. We took an entire day on a Saturday, and it was cool. I presented on all the growing young stuff. But we have been making this change without even using the words growing young. And that's really important. If you don't feel like the words growing young are going to be helpful for you, don't feel like you need to do it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that second thought that I would say is you don't need to be in a college town in order to reach young people. You don't need to be in a place where there's universities and there's gobs and gobs of centralized young people. What we're doing is we're obsessing over local schools. And I don't know exactly how it would work in Scotland, and if there's a difference between in America or the state we live in Michigan versus Scotland. But what we've done is we've just taken a real active interest in what's happening at schools as it relates to families. So when we hired a brand new full-time youth pastor a year and a half ago, we met with school teachers, we met with administrators, we met with principals, and we met with law enforcement who are connected to our school to ask them, what are the main struggles that young people are going through as we hire a youth pastor? And what's the type of youth pastor that you would want us to hire in order for that youth pastor to be at your school on a regular basis? And they gave us such good feedback that we actually realized that's our way to get into the schools, is that actually we want to be of value to them. And so I'll talk about schools in a second, but that's been huge. One of the things that we've changed, another thought that we've had that we've really been serious about is that we talk very openly about mental health and struggle, because young people are more open to talking about mental health and mental struggle struggle these days than I would say any generation that I know of. The young people are just very open about talking about how life is hard these days. It is hard. And I often say I would not want to be 16 today. I would not want to be a young person today. Life is hard, and we just need to acknowledge it, because we need to say what everybody else is thinking, especially young people. And so young people can sniff out really quickly when we're just glossing over difficulty. And young people want to talk about that difficulty. And so a huge part of the change that we've made is just acknowledging that life is hard. Following Jesus is hard. When it comes to taking Jesus's message seriously, and one of the core commitments for growing young, one of the statistics that catches me that you may have heard, or where you're reading the book or going through the cohort, is that when we asked young people why they were at their church, 40% of the young people that we interviewed specifically mentioned that they were challenged by the gospel, that they were challenged to follow Jesus. And so we actually talk very openly at Inspire about how following Jesus is the hardest thing I've ever done. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's rewarding and it's worth it, but it's not easy. And I think young people don't want to hear about an easy gospel these days. I think young people want to hear about a gospel that is hard but worthwhile. And if it wasn't hard, it wouldn't be worth it in the end. And so, Graham, as you were speaking about the mustard seed, I was thinking about some videos that I saw on YouTube. If you want to watch something fun on YouTube, if you want to get into a little bit of a wormhole, you should go to a YouTube channel called Box Lapse, BOXLAPSE. And what they do is they have time lapse footage of plants growing. And so they all have like a green pepper. And what happens with that green pepper is that green pepper actually flowers, like a flower, a beautiful flower comes out. And when you see it in like a time lapse that goes really fast, what you realize is that flower grows, it dies. The beautiful thing that we love, the flower dies, and out of the dead flower comes the fruit. The green pepper comes from the flower. And so what we talk about a lot is how out of our death comes resurrection. Out of our death and pain and struggle actually comes fruit, which is what you were talking about, Graham. And so we talk a lot about how when you're young, you don't fully know what pain and difficulty and suffering looks like, but it's in the times of pain and difficulty and suffering that we actually understand resurrection differently. And so we don't shy away from those kinds of conversations. And what we found is that young people love those conversations. So that's a thought. Specifically as it relates to change, one of the things that I'm realizing is that very few people disagree that long-term change needs to happen. Very few people. And we have a kind of a tendency to go like, oh, people don't like change. And if you remember, we say often, people don't resist change, they resist loss. And so I'd say we actually don't disagree that long-term change needs to happen. That's not where we in the church get stalled. We get stalled in how that long-term change takes place. And people want to be included in how the long-term change takes place. Not that long-term change is taking place, but how the long-term change is taking place. And I often forget when we do long-term change, how long it takes to make that change. And it's because people will disagree on how to get there. But we have found that if you want to do this, if you want to make that long-term change and you want to include people in it, the best way to frame change is by talking about it in terms of experiments. It really, really matters. And so I know that you guys are, working on some experiments, and some experiments that you're doing may be going well. Some of them may be challenging, and it's not going well. If the experiment that you're doing is not going well, that's okay. It's just bring up a new experiment, because people want to be a part of experiments, and people tend to support the experiments if they can help create the experiments. They want to be a part of that. And so letting people know that they are the ones who are winning as that change happens, and always praising people, always praising back into people's hands is a huge deal, because it empowers people. It feels like they're a part of making the change, as opposed to a top-down leadership making change. Let them think that they're a part of it. I mean, not, just let them think, let them be a part of it, so that they really think they're a part of that change. They're going to be more receptive to the change that's happening if they feel like they're actually a part of it. Another thought on change would be that programs seldom change people, but people often change people. And we know that this is true, because if I were to ask each of you, why do you love Jesus? The majority of you are going to say you love Jesus by mentioning a person's name. It's not a program. It wasn't like, oh, I joined this program and that's why I am changed. You're like, no, it's a person who invested in me. And so programs seldom change people, but people often change people. Conversely, if people don't like Jesus or the church, we can often ask why. And conversely, it's often a person's name that comes to mind. And so relationships matter, right? Relationships They can go really well and affect things positively, and they can be really difficult and affect things negatively. And so we look at people, and we want to make sure that growing young, this whole process of change, is not a program to be implemented, but it's people to be loved. And it has to be people oriented. One of the ways that we do this is we actually look at the different personality types that some people have, and we get people in the room based on their personality types. We think that when it comes to long-term decisions and quick decisions, there are two different types of people. And imagine like an archery range, or something. Some people will take an arrow out, and we would say that it's ready, fire, aim. Like before they're even aiming, they're kind of like bam, and they just let that arrow go, and they kind of miss a lot, but they're willing to take the risk without kind of aiming first. They'll just kind of fire. They're really quick to make decisions. Some people are like almost like snipers with the arrow. So they'll got the bow, and they'll just wait, and they aim and they aim, and it's very slow and methodical. And then finally they're ready after aiming for a long time, and they let go. And those people, while they are slow to make change, often don't miss. They're often right on, and they hit that target, they hit that bullseye. So the question would be, with people in your church, who are the people who are a bit more like ready, fire, aim? And who are the people who are more ready, aim, aim, fire? And if you can figure out who those people are, and you can figure out how you're going to work with them to make change happen in the right way and at the right time, you can figure out what types of meetings they should be in. And sometimes we get people who are the snipers, who will take a really long time in meetings, that want to make really fast decisions when they're like, hold on. And we see that as resistance. And they're just like, we just need to slow down a bit. And so it's figuring out the right people with the right personality and temperament to be in the room as we're making change happen. That's a big deal. Another thought is that we are working really hard. This has been a huge thing for us, I think, at Inspire, to make sure that the church knows that we want to grow deep in our relationship with Christ, and we want to grow wide in our reach to the community. And what we've done is we've said we want to do both very well at Inspire. Sometimes churches only think about what it looks like to go wide, but you don't actually grow deep. Other churches, they grow deep, but they don't grow wide. And most churches get caught in the fallacy of thinking it has to be one or the other. We would say the harder thing to do is to be a church that grows deep and wide. And when you can tell people what church looks like for you at this church, you're going to grow deep and you're going to be challenged. For churches to grow wide, the impact is a lot bigger, because people realize that they can grow in their relationship with Jesus, and it doesn't mean that has to stop as we grow wide with young people in particular. So that's been a huge deal. We're very cautious we're cautious toward churches that want to do only one or the other. We want to do both. And I think young people want to know what it means to grow deep and want to make an impact in the community that they're in. And so they want to be a part of a church that's doing both, instead of rather than just one. Another one would be, we prioritized, because we don't have a college, we don't have we're a university around. And so we realized that if we wanted to really grow our time with young people, we needed to go to schools. And now what's interesting is that we pumped a lot of energy into going to schools and being involved with schools. Hey, what are your needs? One of the things we found was that kids will come to school, and they don't have the clothes to change, or access to clothes that change, or to change if they have clothes that are really dirty and they need clean, fresh clothes, or if they're wearing something inappropriate and needs to change. There's all sorts of different things. So we said, what are your main needs? And they were like, we need socks, we need underwear, we need shirts, we need just different things. So we spent the entire summer, last summer, collecting about 1,500 items for our local schools to have, all different sizes of things, so that they could give to our kids in our schools when they needed those things. It has been huge. And what has happened, ironically, and this is so cool, is that we prioritized going to schools, but now those schools are coming to us. We had to go to places where young people are, and now young people are naturally coming to us because they know we care. And so opening our building to young people has been huge. We had a very unfortunate situation happen with a daycare in town. And I don't know if it's called daycare in Scotland, but it's like, parents go to work and they need a place to bring their kids. And we call that daycare in America. I don't know what that is in Scotland, but we had a daycare. It was a very scary situation that the building, the church building, actually caught on fire while kids were in the building. Everybody was safe. Everybody made it. Nobody got hurt at all. They did a great job, but they needed a building. And because we were so invested in the schools and with young people and families, the owner of this daycare came to us. We didn't ask. They came to us as a result and said, could we have our daycare here while we redo our building? And the answer was a quick yes. We just felt like that was low-hanging fruit. We ended up having every day for 4 months 60 families from our community who were dropping off kids every single day at the daycare. And what that was time spent in places where young people are, and people realizing over time they really care about us. We could go to them when we're in need. And I wonder what would happen if the church really was viewed that way with young people, like, oh, we've put so much energy into going to them that we'll actually come to the church when we actually need help. That's just something that takes time. Another thought would be your big, hairy, audacious goals. I'm assuming you talked about BHAGs during the cohort. But I would love to make a Scottish joke right now that instead of calling them BHAGs, we should call them BHaggises, because that would be a very good reference to Scotland and food in Scotland. And so we should call them BHaggises. Our big, hairy, audacious goals, BHaggises. That makes me laugh. It may not have made any of you laugh, but your BHAGs, they are a huge priority. And it's okay if they take a long time. You may have heard this quote throughout the cohort, because we use it a lot, is we tend to overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what can be done in 3 years. Take the long game with this. Don't feel like you need to answer everything. And in fact, if you try to answer everything too quickly, you'll aim at everything and actually hit nothing. And so your BHAGs, those big, big, big goals that you have, they take a really long time, and it's okay if they take a long time. Just give yourself the permission there. 2 more things. We started realizing that there were 2 different types of people at the church. One was what we called mission-minded people who were on board with young people, people who were on board with changes that we wanted to make and how we wanted to go about making those changes. And then we also realized that there are mission-minded people who are willing to make change, and there are preference-minded people who say church needs to be done in this way and this way only. What we decided to do was to figure out who the mission-minded people were. That was the low-hanging fruit. Get them on board with this mission. And so we got the mission-minded people in our corner, and rather than pushing the preference-minded people to our corner, what we've attempted to do is actually push the preference-minded people out of their corner. So it's not even trying to get them in our corner, but it's to ask really hard questions about why that corner of being a preference-based Christian instead of a mission-based Christian is actually detrimental to the church. But it's not so that we could have our own way. It's just to get them to understand, if we have a church without the next generation, this is going to create all sorts of problematic things. And so it's not so much that we care immediately that they get into our corner. It's just getting them to understand what's problematic about where they're standing and not feeling like they need to convert to our side, if that makes sense. That's a slow process. But that mentality has been really big for us. The last thing I'll mention is this. Some people think that when you focus on young people, it means that no one else at the church matters. It means that older people don't matter. And what I would say is that you can simultaneously focus on older people and still prioritize young people. Just because you focus on young people doesn't mean older people don't matter, and vice versa. Just because you focus on older people doesn't mean that younger people don't matter. What we say though to older people though is we need you as older people in our churches more than ever before. More than ever before. We need you. We need you to be mission minded. And with that in mind, what we're saying is we need you to actually be a part of helping reach young people. And that's where we hope your role fits. And when we've done that and framed it in that way, to say we need you, we can't do this without you, what we've actually found is that people are willing to lean in. And so those are 10 thoughts very quickly that we've kind of had as we are in this season at Inspire. And some thoughts about change that we think is helpful, and maybe some encouragement to you guys as you're making change. And so, Graham, I don't know what the next part of this looks like, but I'll turn it over to you, and I'll answer any questions or do anything as needed. But hopefully that was helpful.
Yep. Thank you, Matthew. You've given us all a huge amount to kind of think about. I'm actually going to I'm going to put folk into your church groups just now, just for a moment, just to reflect on some of what Matthew has said. I was very aware, as Matthew was speaking, that we almost need to downsize, if you like, what you were talking about, Matthew. So a £1.5 million programme would, it's just not where any of us are at. And so it's that kind of, what does that look like at a tenth of that size? It's that kind of, we've had 100 folk who've been baptised. Yeah, most of us will be celebrating if there were 10 in that period. So it's that kind of, what about in our own setting? But I think the principles that you're talking about actually come across. So, much of what you're talking about and carrying people with you and involving them in what's going on and working out how people can contribute best given the gifts and the outlook that they've got. All of those things are important principles for us to take and embed into our own situations. Welcome back. Please do put into the chat. So we're looking for one thing from every congregation. So some things about what you were talking about and sharing together. So I can, if you could mute yourself, that would be helpful. You'll be unmuted because you were in your rooms. So if you could mute yourself, then that'd be helpful. Or Neil, you can run through and tick them all. If you could put into the chat, what the encouragements in your own context, in your own situation, then we'll pick up one or two of those just as we move on. But one of the things we were talking about while you were away was a bit of the backstory of your own congregation, Matthew, because you were talking about how roll the clock back 5 years and the congregation's not doing a 1.5 million kind of investment program. They're actually looking around going, is there a long-term future for us as a church? And that led them into the Growing Young program. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were 73 years old as a church. We are currently 73 years old as a church. About 20 years ago, we were thriving as a church, and it was awesome. And the church really dipped and was not doing well. We were on the verge of closing. And so some changes were made that were really intentional. And we were kind of on our last leg as a church, honestly. If you talk to people about that time, it was very painful and difficult. And it wasn't until, really a couple of years ago that we just kind of became unashamedly okay with saying we're going to do this, that the church really started to grow and actually, is at this point we're at now. I mean, we're in a really small community. We don't have the reach that a lot of, we're not a mega church by any means, and not trying to even be a mega church, but we have our passion has actually our passion to do growing young and the principles of growing young is actually the reason why all of this is actually growing. And so it's not really about $1.5 million. It's not really about the number of people in your church. It's just that if you really, really care and you're intentional about this, you'll see the growth actually happen as a result of trying growing young, if that makes sense. So It's not really about the size.
Yeah, I think it's the comment that you made about overestimating what you can do in a year and underestimating, and most of us would push it out beyond kind of 3 years and say 5 years. And so in your context, the first year looks like there wasn't a lot kind of changed. Folk were beginning to talk about things, and maybe not much more than that. But the fruitfulness 5 years down the line is now evident to see. And I guess it's that encouragement for folk to see that it is that small beginnings and the intentional kind of nature of what the church began to move into. Neil, can I just pull you in just now? We are going to do this later, but maybe just now, because you were talking about the importance really of being intentional in this.
Yes, I was struck when Matthew said that his church was quite intentional in making some changes, and it would be lovely to think that my church, your church, any church would just drift into the kind of growth and the kind of connection with young people that we all long to see. And the reality is that young people just don't just drift into church. It's because we're quite intentional in doing that. In our church in St Andrew Blackadder, we were part of the first cohort, and we embraced growing young. And it was interesting that at a Kirk session meeting at the beginning of the month, we were doing a wee look back at saying how had what had the impacts of growing young been on the church and the life of the congregation. And the Kirk session was having this discussion, and then somebody said, by the way, did anybody actually ask the young people how they felt growing young had gone? And that was this kind of this silence in the Kirk session when we realized that nobody had thought about doing that. So it was a salutary reminder how easy it is to slip out of that pattern of being intentional about prioritizing young people and putting them front and center. And well, needless to say, that we then decided, well, we need to make sure that we're asking young people in the future. But
No. I mean, your comment about that, Matthew, was that churches won't drift into reaching young people. It's not a
Yeah. Yeah. We're in a world that right now where young people are not going to drift into the church. We have to be intentional about reaching them. And this doesn't mean that we won't go through pain and difficulty ourselves as leaders. I've taken some hits for this. It's not like 100% of people are on board. I think it's being resolute about really, really caring as we become intentional. We're really resolute that this is the right thing to do. And so I'm willing as a leader to take hits on behalf of young people so that those young people can have faith. And I think as leaders, we just know, like, sometimes we're going to fail. Sometimes we're going to take some hits, but we're doing it for the sake of young people. And when we're intentional, it really matters.
no. Okay, we're going to hand over the floor in some ways to yourselves and to hear a wee bit about your stories, because I mean the sense might be all about listen to Matthew and we've got nothing big to share, but Matthew's story from a few years ago was that actually they were nearly closing, and it is those kind of small beginnings. So, coaches, who are we going to pick on? Any of the coaches, give me a congregation.
I pick on Anne from Gala, who's chatted in about the focus on building warm relationships. And sorry to put you on the spot, would you share a bit about that and similar you shared with us last night on the call with the other point leaders?
Could I ask I'd already asked Lindsay if she could share, so can I ask Lindsay Fairbairn to share?
Surely.
Thank you.
Where's Lindsay?
Oh, apologies. I'm using my phone instead of a laptop for the first time.
Yeah, you're fine.
It's not been particularly easy, but yes, the warm relationships has been a big thing for us, and I think through that we've we've really come to find a few more mission-minded people that you were talking about, and people are becoming a little bit more willing to step out their comfort zone and kind of join in with us. Some of our kind of highlights have been Messy Church. That's definitely grown from the children that we had. We've got more and more families who are coming, and instead of parents sort of dropping off or being on the periphery, more and more of the parents are actually choosing to stay for the whole session and be part of the whole meal, and not just the meal but the activities as well. Girls Brigade has gone from strength to strength. We're having you know, lots of conversations with parents. Come Dine With Me has been quite an interesting one, where people have spent time with families that they wouldn't normally have done. So people signed up for that, and then we matched them up based on the time of day, the type of meal or event they would like to attend, and it's worked really, really well. Everything from people meeting one-to-one to our final one on Sunday evening, which was 20 people who came together before our evening service and shared a Chinese takeaway in the church, which was just lovely. And we had people who've not participated in anything else who just suddenly came along to that. So it was really, really nice. We've started a games afternoon on a Friday. That came from a member of the congregation who really hasn't been party to anything, but came up with this idea that it would be nice to have board games on a Friday afternoon. So she's taken a bit of a lead role in that, which again is amazing. It's getting someone else involved in leading an activity. And then there's things around Christmas with the Chris Tingle service. We've invited the town band to come along to be part of that, and they're also using us as a plan B. Last year, the carols round the Christmas tree in the town centre had to be cancelled because of the weather, so we've offered our church as a venue for that to go ahead, should the weather be not great this time around. That's sounding quite good as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. That's really helpful. And as those kind of the small things and where will they kind of take us, but real encouragements in there. Thank you for that. Who are we going to next?
Graham, I wonder if we go to St Andrews High. Emma Stewart jumped in and sort of acknowledged that the Cafe Church, that was an experiment, is now at the stage of, she said to me, embedded recently. So Emma, do you want to say a little bit about that journey maybe?
Yes, we did start up Cafe Church. We're a very traditional church, and chairs in rows, and yeah, just normal Church of Scotland programme. So Peter came along for the first time and we introduced Cafe Church, and it was very different. The chairs were moved and tables put in. We kind of talk about ideas for themes that are suggested, and we've had about every second month we've had a Cafe Church. It's maybe the past few months there's not been as many, but we're actually having 2 in December, and yeah, look forward to seeing how the next stage of that goes. It does involve a bit of work, moving everything around, but we've managed to keep going with it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Emma. Time for 1 or 2 more.
I wonder if anyone from Penicuik would want to share about the breakfast club that's maybe on the way. John Ruckert, maybe. He says, picking on him.
You have to pick on somebody there. Folk are, there you are, John. You're in the spotlight now. You've got to speak. You're muted, so you're only speaking to yourself at the moment.
The Breakfast Club is starting up slowly, probably in the new year. We're at the stage of collecting PVGs. We've also got funding from a local councillor who is funding it to the tune of £4,000 per year. We've also got some funding perhaps coming from Cala Homes due to a party from Pennycook Churches together singing at an event they're holding before Christmas. And so it is massively complicated. Once it's all in place, we hope very well. It's to provide breakfasts for children who possibly haven't had any breakfast and possibly haven't even had any dinner the night before. And so to help them with their learning and to sharpen their minds up. They can't possibly be when they've had anything to eat.
No. Am I right in thinking, John, that this has come out through conversations with the school?
Yes, it came up with conversations with the school. It communicated with the school several times before we got an answer. And we went with them the idea with Toasty Tuesday, and they weren't interested in that. And in any case, it wouldn't work anyway because of the changing of the lunch times. And we also said, but we'd be interested in anything which you would be interested in us doing. And so they came back with the idea we would like volunteers to run a breakfast club. And so we've got a whole range of volunteers from Pennycook Churches together and interest.
See, I think that's an important part of the story. It's that kind of listening to what folk are actually saying, which is what you were saying as well, Matthew, and actually see it replicated in Pennycook. You know, we can do this for you, and they say no, but can you do? And you immediately say yes, and it's that listening and providing what folk are saying. Thanks for that, John.
Graham, can I just add something to that?
Shirley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another important part of that is the funding of it, because the schools obviously have a restricted budget, and fundraising for a school is hard. Whereas the church is actually, ironically, in a better place to do fundraising for these kind of things. You know, we can apply for grants and stuff on that basis. And so one of the criteria was that, you know, we had to fund a lot of the stuff, like the food, which is expensive. So hence the reason why we've got the councillor is generously giving us some money, and other folks are giving us some money. But, you know, it's one thing to say yes, but you need to also be able to back that up with being prepared to fund it. And, you know, so that was an important part of being, you know, a help to the school.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, I see real parallels between that and really what you've done, Matthew, in many ways.
Yeah, I love hearing some of these stories. Like, John, that what you're doing is based upon need from asking about it and asking what they're wanting. And who would not want to get on board with young people not even having access to food? And so as you're meeting their essential needs and then showing people in the community what it means to be best neighbors. I mean, you guys are living out the best neighbors core commitment in a pretty remarkable way. I love that. I love those stories that you guys are sharing.
Okay, we've got time for one other. Somebody want to nobble somebody else, or somebody want to jump in? There was something from Trinent. Catherine, are you willing to tell us a bit about the light event and the connection with families there?
Yes, it was just in response to Halloween, and we wanted to use the church hall garden, and it was so lovely because I don't know, we maybe had about 40 folk into our garden, and I think we were reflecting on it, and we felt that we'd identified a need, and that was for families to be able to come to something free at that time. And it was also very low key. We had lots of different activities that they could just wander around the garden. There was a fire pit and they could make s'mores, and there were sparklers that they could have, and we had carrots on the end of them so that they could hold them. There was hot chocolate, and it just felt like a really lovely atmosphere. We were welcoming them, but they were giving as much, by coming and enjoying everything. So the advertising was also very low key as well, and it was very much giving them. We weren't dictating anything. We were providing things that they could do with their children. There was a treasure hunt as well, looking for things that lit up as it got darker. So it was just providing a space for them, I think, to enjoy time with their children for free, in their own, no rush to do anything. And we would hope that we would be able to build on that in the future.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Matthew to tell us a story in a moment, but are there any kind of questions that folk would want to ask before I ask Matthew to share with us about Norma? No, Neil and I remember this story, Matthew, from when we heard it at Fuller, and you told it at the last cohort, and I think Neil and I would both be going, whatever else you share, Matthew, you must share this story. So I don't know how many times you've already told it, but I have a sense that for you it's so important. And it ties in with what you were saying about giving folk ownership of what's going on. And in a sense, yeah, I loved what you were saying. I think your last point was about the older folk in the church seeing that their role in this is absolutely crucial. So we're not wanting you out the way so that we can get the younger folk in, but we actually want all the generations together, and your role in this is really important. And in many ways, the story of let me hand over to you before I steal your thunder.
Yeah, no, this is great. I love this story mostly because it's just meaningful for me personally. But yeah, I've told this hundreds and hundreds of times, but it connects. When I was in middle school, I was not a really nice kid. I wasn't a Christian, and I was a little angry. I was just an angry young kid, and I had a paper route. And in the middle of my paper route was this kind of an assisted living facility called Four Seasons Village. And so I would drop off my papers at different places along the paper route, and in Four Seasons Village, I would drop them off at the houses that were there. And so I did that one day, and I came home, and there was a voicemail or an answering machine message, like an old school answering machine message. And it was this woman named Norma, who I had never really seen before. I didn't know who she was. And Norma said, Matthew, you forgot my newspaper. And the truth to be told is, I don't think I forgot her newspaper. And it doesn't really matter that much, other than the fact that I called this woman, Norma, back, who was elderly. And I just said, I didn't forget your newspaper. And she's like, but you did. And it was kind of a pain. And what it meant was I needed to use my own money, to go buy a brand new newspaper, which, you're not making a lot of money as a paper boy anyway. And I had to go buy a new newspaper, and I had to bring it back to Norma. And it was just a big inconvenience. And so I did. I went and got a new newspaper, and I was bringing it to the front door. And Norma, while I was in middle school, Norma greets me at the door and says, "Hi, Matthew." And very angrily, as a very mean-spirited middle school kid, I didn't respond. I took the newspaper, I threw it out the front step, basically, and walked off. It was not my best look, okay? I get it now. It was not a good decision. It was not mature at all. And I was surprised because I was walking away. Norma very casually, just calmly says, "Thank you, Matthew." And I didn't say a word. The next morning, it was 5 a.m. And I come to the door where Norma was, and I was going to put the newspaper in her mailbox. And who greets me at the door at 5 a.m? Norma. And I perceived that as a kind of a slight towards me for not giving her her newspaper the day before. I was like, it just felt kind of controlling and micromanaging a little. And so she said, "Hi, Matthew." And I didn't say hi to her back. I just dropped the newspaper off and I left. 2 weeks later, she had been at the door every morning at 5 a.m, leading up to the 2 weeks later. And then her husband, George, was now joining her at 5 a.m. And it felt so excessive, but honestly, the more I got to know George and Norma at 5 a.m. at the door, the more I realized like they were really kind, genuinely nice people. They invited me in for cookies. They had baked stuff for me. And they just took the time to get to know me. And so that happened for, I don't know, probably another year or so where I got to know George and Norma. And then I quit my paper out and I didn't see them again for years. And then I became a Christian when I was 18 years old at a summer camp in the US that I visited or that I attended. And I became a Christian and I attended church for the very first time after I became a Christian when I was 18. And I walk in the church lobby, and who do I see in the church lobby? I see George and Norma. Norma sees me, and she has a walker at the time. She is elderly. She is moving faster than I've ever seen her move. And she comes up to me as fast as possible, and she's weeping. And she says to me, "Matthew, I heard that you became a Christian at summer camp last week." And I said, "Yeah." And as she's weeping, she said, "Matthew, I've never told you this, but do you remember the day that you forgot my newspaper?" And I wanted to be like, "No, I didn't forget your newspaper," but I didn't say that. I didn't say it. She said, "I felt like God just spoke into my soul that I needed to wake up every day at 5 a.m, and I needed to greet you at the door and be kind to you and show you love and pray for you that one day you would trust in Jesus and become a Christian." And she's weeping as she's telling me this because she's like, it's happened. It's happened now. And I'm weeping as she's telling me this story at 18 years old. And I went away to college to be a pastor. And when I would come home for breaks or for summer, I would visit some people, but I wouldn't visit. I realized that I wasn't visiting my friends from high school. I wasn't visiting a bunch of people my age. I wasn't visiting the people I knew. I would visit my mom and dad. I would visit my grandmother and my grandfather, and I would visit George and Norma. And the reason why I think I visited George and Norma was because George and Norma loved me in my most unlovable moment. And that is really what empathy is it's choosing to love in our most unlovable, in the most unlovable moments with young people. Like young people need to experience that love, but may not give it back. Developmentally, we might not even understand what we're supposed to do. I was just a struggling, angry kid. And this woman inconvenienced her life to wake up at 5 a.m. for years to pray for me that one day I would accept Christ. And she's the person that I'm drawn to as I get older, and both George and Norma have since passed. In fact, Norma's sister last week, she was the last of that family. She just passed away last week, her sister Lavina. But they were the people I wanted to spend time with because they loved me when it was unlovable. And so my encouragement would be, who are the people in your community, the young people who might drive you crazy, might drive you up a wall, whom you just can't stand, and they're mean and they're not mature. And what would it look like for you to love them like George and Norma loved me? Because that's actually being Jesus to the young people in our community. Is that George and Norma were an embodiment of Jesus to me, and I am who I am now because of the way that George and Norma loved me. And so my encouragement would be, who can you be a George and Norma to? Because you're actually being Jesus to them. That's, I think, those kinds of stories are how we will grow young relationally and not programmatically. This was not a program. This was just relationship and servanthood. And so that's the George Norma story. I don't know if there's any clarification that you need there, Graham, but That's been a big, big deal for me over the years, and I want to embody that as I get older. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, no, it's a really helpful story. And it does embody so many of the principles of growing young, particularly that the empathy today and what it means to do that, and the fact that everyone can do that. And I do have a sense that sometimes folk in our congregations think that there's nothing that they can do, and yet, yeah, it's simply not the case. It's simply not the case. So, yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. I want to share with you just some ideas or some thoughts as we finish up. So Douglas, particularly at Deprez, had said to me, "Can you give us some hints about what we should be doing next?" And that was why we talked about the intentional nature of things, as Neil kind of spoke about that. This won't just fall into your lap. You've started on a journey, but actually you'll need to be intentional about continuing this journey. So let me just share just 4 things just now that I hope may be helpful for you just as we finish. One thing is about your role as a team in the church, and your growing young team. You've been together for 2 years. Your team will probably have grown and changed during that time. Now might be a good time to talk about refreshing or reframing your growing young team. But we would encourage you to continue to meet together, maybe every 3 months or so. And it might be that even tonight before you leave, if I put you back in your rooms just for a moment, that you might say, when are we going to meet early in the new year? And what are we going to talk about and share about so that we can help our church continue on this journey that we're on? You've been providing some leadership to your church already. How do you continue to do that? Who do you need to draw into your team that continues? It might be that some of you are feeling, actually, now's the time for me to step back from it. So that's why it's about refreshing and reframing your growing young team. Who are the group that are going to take this on? It may simply be who are around just now. It may be that you need to add some people, some folk who've come with ideas. I loved that Lindsay was saying somebody came with an idea and we ran with that idea. There might be somebody that you add to your growing young team. They weren't around 2 years ago. They weren't on your radar at all, but they might be now. So how do you refresh and reframe that growing young team? The second thing is in all of this, and we want to encourage you to respond to what God is saying to you, to walk close with him. At the end of the last session, when Peter Nielsen had done all of that with us about the way that we walk and about the way that we walk, it's a long journey that we're on and we walk with God. Somebody said to me at the end, if we'd known what we were coming to today, we wouldn't have come to it. But actually now we're so glad we were here, because it was a reminder that we're on a journey with God. Find those spaces and those times to speak about that together and to listen to what God is saying. Those things are absolutely crucial. Report to your kirk session and to the congregation. Ask for their commitment to the long haul. Explain to them that this formal part of the programme is over, but actually you've only just started on it. Speak to them about that. Talk to your elders, get their ownership. Speak to the congregation, talk to them about the part that they might play in this. And then the final thing would be to remember to prayerfully nurture what is growing. That there will, in all of this, be some things that you will need to let go of. We've talked about this being experimenting. And some experiments, you try them and you get to a point of saying, actually, it's not this. So the folk in Pennycook tried for a long time to say that we're going to do the equivalent of a Toasty Tuesday, but had to let go of that to take hold of something else. So there may be things that you're trying and have tried and actually they're not for the long haul. But there may be some other things that actually you need to just work hard to get over the hump, that difficult point. Yeah, I remember sharing with one of my staff members early on when they were starting something up, that actually to begin with it would probably fly and there'd be a lot of folk around and then it would dip. And it would be what came out the other side of that that was important. I remember her saying to me, actually, I needed to know that when the dip came, because that allowed me to carry on. So there may be those points where actually things have dipped a little. Listen to what God is saying in those moments. Is it time to let it go, or is it time to actually take hold of it? Because actually there is something for the long term that's in that. And I think that all of that is important. So making sure that we're intentional in where we're going. Your role in that and how you take that forward, how you involve others, and continuing with the experiments that you have set up. Peter, you were particularly speaking about this in relation to the stuff in Musselburgh. Do you want to just share a bit about what you were saying earlier to me?
We were talking about embedding, Graham. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, Growing Young encourages us to listen, to experiment, and to embed. And I think that's a really helpful principle to go forward, to continue listening, to go back to listening. And I think, again, Matthew helped us to identify some realities that came out of conversations when you listened, responding to people's needs as opposed to our ideas and our enthusiasm. I've been guilty of that so often. I had a bright idea and you rush off. So the listening, the experimenting, that's such a good word these days. And we've enjoyed that word. I think we've kind of got our lab coats on and said, we're not doing this for more than 2 times, 1 time. And then embedding is where we finally get to in terms of culture change. Just how we work with the Kirk session, how we as a church embed these principles, not just the activities, but we know why we're doing the activities so that people come closer to Jesus. And, you know, with Musselburgh, with the Cafe Church, you know, Emma said, we get it and we enjoy Cafe Church. We enjoy the participation of people and it is part of who we now are. And it was a joy for me to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's that embedding thing. So we've done the experimenting, but actually there comes a point where we need to embed kind of what we're doing and the importance of that. I'm gonna, Audrey, you were mentioning how your coaching group really have enjoyed and appreciated being together and have drawn from each other. And I guess, does that come to an end when this comes to an end, or what would you be saying to folk?
Yeah, it was just on the back of the call that the 3-point leaders that for the churches that I've been working with these last 2 years, it's been something that's been a real joy to see the way that they have supported not just the point leaders, but the Growing Young teams in each of those 3 churches have supported one another as they've journeyed together on this. And I know that that's been a real blessing for each of those churches, and often seeing it's the mirror being held up by others to actually help the other party see how they have been journeying and how far they've come. It was something that nearly everybody would precursor of what they would be feeding back about where they were was, oh, we've not done as much as we had hoped, or we've not done this, not done that. And the other 2 would be saying, actually, you've done loads. That doesn't sound like you've not been doing much, and that sounds really positive. But also putting, you know, good suggestions in as well as to how things could maybe be picked up and taken forward as well. So I would just really hope that support for one another continues beyond the formalities of this 2 years comes to an end, because that's been something that I know has been hugely valued by those 3 congregations, or the 3 Growing Young teams at least.
Yeah. I love the way you talk about that, because we often talk about, you know, when you draw together, you hold folk accountable for what they've done. Actually, the opposite is true in your setting. Well, not the opposite, but it's that sense of folk affirm what you've been doing, and you can be tempted to think we've not got very far, we've not done very much, and others are actually able to affirm that, and the affirmation of that encourages you to go on and to do more. And I think, you know, that is really important. I've just finished a series of videos for Church of Scotland on managing change, and one of the things I've been saying is the importance of travelling together. So although this is coming to an end as a kind of formal kind of thing, we do want to encourage folk to travel together, and if we can do things to facilitate that, please let us know. But yeah, that travelling together is really important. Matthew, you're nodding your head. Are you anything to kind of feed into that just as we draw things to a close?
Yeah, I'll just as an encouragement, just to say, sometimes some of you may have tried to make some changes, and you've journeyed together, and what has ended up happening is that you actually feel like you might be in a worse spot than you are before you made the changes, because it's so hard to make change. And we call that change valley at Inspire. And what we say is that sometimes when you make changes, you'll hit these bumps and you'll do really good and it's great. And then all of a sudden you'll realize you're actually, because of those changes, you might be in a worse spot than you were at first. And you're in that valley of change. And it's in the valley of change that we want to give up. It's in the valley of change where we say it's not worth it. It's in the valley of change where leaders will stall out. And if we can push through that change valley and get to the other side, that's actually where we see the growth is on the other side. And so my encouragement as you've experimented and as you've tried things would be, don't give up if it feels harder than it did at first, because you might just be in change valley and you can get through that. And if you can get through that, you're going to find yourself on the other side having made really, really great progress. Just don't give up in the midst of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Neil, I'm going to ask you to close in prayer just in a moment, but I think there is something in that. You know, I was aware, just as Emma was sharing about Musselburgh, that there comes a time when you're thinking, oh, we've got to move these seats again because we're doing cafe church this week. And it's those kind of points that actually, no, we need to work through this, because the initial excitement of kind of this is really good and it's great has given way to something else. And those moments can be more difficult to work through. But actually, how do you pursue that? And it's that intentionality that is there and is important. So I'm going to invite Neil just to close in prayer for us just now, and then I'm going to put you back into your rooms so that you can begin to chat together about arranging a meeting for your team early in the new year, who else you might invite to that, and so that you've got something in the diary for 2025 and setting yourself off for the new year. But I'm going to hand over to Neil, and whether you want to say anything, Neil, before you pray, or whether you just want to pray.
I think we should pray. So let's pray together. Our gracious God, we thank you for growing young for the last 2 years, for the journey we've been on together, for the discoveries, for the experiments, for the moments of joy, of new connections made, new possibilities discerned. We thank you for new relationships, for progress made. But we also come to you with our sadness about setbacks, about the things we hoped would happen, the people we thought would come on board, the people who did come on board, but then quickly lost energy and lost enthusiasm. The times when we've not seen in our church some of the things that other people seem to be talking about in their church. We ask that you will help us to pay attention to the promptings of your Spirit, to pay attention to the promptings that come when we read your word, when we talk to one another, when we listen to young people, whether they're in our church or in the community, and that you will give us the courage to follow where you lead, to sow seed, and to trust that the mustard seed that is sown one day will grow into the big tree that many can take shelter in. And whether we are the ones who see that day coming, or whether we simply lay the groundwork for others to come, not to worry about that. And so we ask you to help us in each of our churches to keep going, that we might see a new generation of young people coming to know and love Jesus and discover how his way helps them make sense of life. And so we commit ourselves and one another into your hands now, in Jesus' name. Amen.